Now it's time for Movie Friends with your hosts Michelle and Seth. We're talking film without pretension. We're finding cats that are unexpected. We'll watch a movie, film, or schmovie. And we want you to join our journey. So subscribe and share this podcast, or this might just be the last of the Movie Friends. We're movie friends. We want to be your movie friends.
Hey, welcome to New Release Review, part of the Movie Friends podcast. My name is Seth. Today, we're talking about Backrooms from 2026, directed by Kane Parsons. Now, folks, we will be discussing spoilers for Backrooms. And our guest today, I think, is a certifiable expert in the video series Backrooms. So we will be talking a little bit about that as well. I don't know that we'll full on tell you everything that happens, just in case you want to watch those. But just be aware, if you have not seen Backrooms and you do not want to hear the ending discussed, don't listen to this, please, for the love of God. Enough, okay? Let's protect cinema together, folks. All right? Anyway, my guest today is a returning guest, and little known fact, he was actually the first guest for this branch of the show all the way back when with Wes Anderson's Asteroid City. That's right, folks. It's our good friend Liam, a.k.a. Rolo Tony.
That's me.
Hey, how's it going?
Well, thank you so much. Glad to be back. It's been a long time, but at the same time, it's a perfect spot to be on here. This movie, I feel like it's slowly been building for months, and now we're here, and it feels like it's kind of like a tidal wave. You know?
Oh yeah,
it's just hit everything and everyone, and people you wouldn't even expect to know about it come out of the woodworks, and they're like, "Oh, you know, a Backrooms movie coming out," and you're like, "How do you know about that?" You know, so this really feels like the monoculture thing that people have been missing for so long.
Right. Absolutely. Now, hey, before we get into Backrooms, I wanted to ask you, can you talk to us about These Guys Got Juice and what you got going on?
Of course, yeah. So I'm co-hosting a show with the Doug Files. You can find him over on Twitter, and you can also find me at poor old Rolo Tony. But These Guys Got Juice. It's like a film and television podcast. I say like because we mainly want to stick to films, but then there have been a lot of recent television series that we've been going through. We covered the Pit series. We actually covered the Pit with Jared Gilman from Moonrise Kingdom. If anybody wants to check that out. And then we've also been going through the Euphoria season 3, which has been a total disaster, horrible. Don't like it. And when it comes to movies, we try to keep a good mixture of new releases. We've recently been touching on actor directed films. So we've got an episode on Walter Mitty coming out. And we've done an episode on Bulworth, and we want to definitely lean more in the political sphere as well. There's a lot of political minded films and episodes that we've recorded. They'll be coming out soon. That's a long-winded way of saying that I'm just, bullshitting about movies with a friend.
Very good. Very cool. That's the best thing on earth, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, like you've got the title says it all, I feel.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. We really cornered the market on that title. It's like,
yeah, it's actually really tough, guys. You don't know this if you don't podcast, right? But if you try to trademark a podcast name, the Movie Friends guys, they'll take you to court, Yeah.
Anything similar to film, cinema, movie, flick, plus a relationship, where we shut it down right away. So
Seth's a whiz. I don't know how he cornered that market, but he did. Hats off to you, man.
I was going to make a Richard Pryor joke and be like, there's many other ways in which I'm similar to Richard Pryor as alongside being a whiz, but
right. You just really wanted to build into that whiz.
Just a joke for all you whiz heads out there. Okay, so I sent you a message saying,
that's right.
Hey, I was probably going to skip Backrooms, but I saw you know stuff about it. Would you be interested in
Yeah.
coming on? And so before we get into the movie, I want to ask you, what is your experience with this series, with Kane Parsons, with uh, YouTube scary videos? Why was this on your radar? Were you looking forward to it? Give us the whole big Rolo Tony sandwich.
Okay, let me crack the knuckles and put on the gloves. I don't like it when they make the sandwiches spare hand. But when it comes to you know my introduction, or I guess like steeping in internet stuff, because like growing up, like YouTube, I remember when it came out, right? And it was always this cool thing that was like, oh, you can find music videos on there, you can find, people may edit things together, and that might be cool. But as the years went on, people were trying to find ways to evolve its use cases, and even from its inception, people were like, this is a very exciting tool for independent distribution in the filmmaking sphere, right? And a lot of major hurdles have presented themselves since then, right? Obviously it's an algorithmic driven thing. If you like and then also earlier in its life cycle, you could only put up like a certain length of video, right? Like 10 minutes long or 30 minutes long. But as time has gone on, there's no cap, whatever, people can post whatever, but it's still held back algorithmically. What's interesting though is that people always tried, right? People always tried to, like, if let's say somebody made like a review of a video game, maybe they'd have elements of filmmaking, like you would say, like in The Angry Video Game Nerd, right? Just as a weird reference to pull into this, but we're talking about the Backrooms, which came from 4chan, right? Which is one of
Mm-hmm.
those terrible things when you hear that and you're like, oh, you know, I
Right.
don't like the fact that it's from there, but it does speak to the fact that, like, it just came from a public forum, anonymous background of the photo, as well as an anonymous backstory that was just written in the replies, right? And people often talk about how crazy this is, right? Oh, like it's the first
Mm.
internet ghost story. I don't think that's anything new. I think this is just like a reinvention of the urban legend, right? People just
Sure.
used to do
Yeah.
this to each other, and now it's evolved in this way. So to me, YouTube and the way that Backrooms evolved are very similar in the sense that these things kind of morph as people kind of get a better understanding of it. And on YouTube, you start to see things like Marble Hornets, right? Marble Hornets was this original inspiration for the storytelling for Slender Man, which was like a full found footage thing. It's like several hours long. I wouldn't recommend anybody watch it. I don't really think it's that very good. I've seen like the first 2 hours, and every time I'm like, no, this I'm out.
Yeah.
But the major thing is in YouTube storytelling, they take advantage of the format. Usually, they'll do things like integral parts of the story will not be in the YouTube videos they post, but in like a Twitter post, an Instagram post, a hidden message that they hide away somewhere, right? Like it's a lot about interactivity as well as like building the universe out from there. This is kind of to give like a bigger understanding of where things are going. I would say that Kane Parsons is similar to someone like Alan Resnick. He's a part of Wham City Comedy. They did This House Has People in It, unedited footage of a bear. Those are Adult Swim shorts. Have you seen those?
No, I don't think so.
You should check those out. Those are very good. And also those are like 15 minutes long, so it's not like, a
Mm.
huge time commitment. But those are like similar to Too Many Cooks, where it's like it presents itself as one thing, very quickly becomes another
Right.
thing.
Right.
And then there's like a bunch of other supplementary things. But Alan Resnick was a part of that team, and he made a thing called Alan Tutorial, where it's essentially like somebody who's very disturbed recording with their phone really bad tutorials. And then there's
Okay.
like and in the concept of that, there's like a larger force that's forcing him to do the tutorials, or
Got it.
his living situation is dark. um, I would say that's worth watching. That's probably like a couple hours to watch in its entirety, and then there's also
Hmm.
posts to consume as well. um, and as YouTube started to evolve in this kind of storytelling fashion, the Backrooms idea had existed for a few years. Kane Parsons was like doing essentially like graphics tests on Attack on Titan and decided to do the same thing with the Backrooms, and he posted it online and it blew up. He just liked
Got
the
it.
aesthetic, and it was just like, oh, right place and right time. And then he built the storytelling out from there. And, we're not going to get into the major mechanics of the story within the video series, but what I will say is there's two types of videos within the
Mhm.
series. And that's, the found footage ones, which is just like random people entering the back rooms. And then there's the async stuff, which is with the researchers. And that's like predominantly what the series is. This is about like studying the back rooms and anomalies and things that happen within bureaucracy. And actually, the series is far more political in its commentary than the movie ever is. So we'll probably be talking a lot about how those themes fit in with this film as we get further in. But I would say my obsession with this stuff is it's a new frontier, right? And it's not so much
Right.
a cannibalization of the things that have existed before, but it's an adaptation to things that just exist, right? And these are coming from ordinary people, right? It's not like everybody's industry plants. You can say that about maybe a couple people, but you can't say that about everybody who blows up on YouTube, right? And a lot of it
Right.
is just like
Yep.
people who make it on their own. I've rambled enough. I feel like I've gone in circles a few ways, but if there's any specific parts that you wanted some clarity on, just let me know.
Yeah, I agree. You and I were talking a little bit before we started about the anger that exists online about this term YouTubers, which I've been very open over the years. I do not watch YouTube for entertainment. I watch
Sure.
YouTube for education, and what I've found is that there's a line in your age where if you're born past a certain year, YouTube is where you go to learn how to fix a toilet, right?
Of
Or like,
course.
how do I do this thing? And you go there. Versus people just past that threshold are like, oh, I watch all these videos. I know all these people who create content for YouTube specifically. And that's not me. Now, having said that, I have nothing against people learning how to make, moving images and then that translating into film. I just don't care about that. I don't care that this kid is 19 or however old he
Right.
is. Is
I
he
think
like
he's like
19?
20 now. I think he's going to turn
Yeah.
21 soon, but yeah.
But all these people talking about, you can't make a good movie until you're a certain age, or, oh, it's absurd that this kid is being given. I don't care about any of that. Show me the movie, and then I will talk about the movie. And if some of those factors play into the movie being good or bad, okay, then I'll be interested in those factors. But ultimately, the only thing that exists to me is the film. I want to see the film in a bubble. I don't want to go into it thinking, here's the 19-year-old's film, because I try to enter every film without prejudging it.
Of course.
I don't want to like I don't want to bring in any baggage, good or bad. We're looking at a new Spielberg in a few weeks. I have to put aside the good and the bad of how I feel about that director to meet his film where it is, for me to try. And I don't think that, that's necessarily an exercise that every person who watches a movie needs to go through. Sometimes you go to see the Super Mario Brothers movie because you want to and you have a good time. But for folks who I think sit with films more often than perhaps we should, I do think it's an important thing to be able to leave all that behind and just meet the movie where it is. And so going into this, I didn't know anything about Backrooms, and my son watches the videos, so I went to see it with him.
Mhm.
And he kept trying to like tell me little things, and I'd be like, stop. Like, I do not want to know. I don't want to know any. I want to go into this completely empty. And so I did, which I then spent, several moments during the film leaning over to him and being like, is that actually in the videos? But yeah, no, I think I agree with you. It's a new medium, just like music videos were, just like TV
Absolutely.
commercials were. And people cut their teeth making TV commercials, making music videos. Oftentimes, some artists that we really enjoy, they made their money doing that type of work, and then they took that money and made movies that we love. So
Hmm.
I know that this was really hard for people to wrap their heads around because they're angry because this is the moment we're in and we can connect to the emotions of the moment we're in. We can't go back, to the 80s and early 90s and be like, David Fincher, stop making car commercials. You hack. How
How
dare
dare you
you?
sell? How dare you sell out by my parameters and my
Right.
morals?
Right.
I think that there is some kind of worry that people can have in terms of Google owning YouTube and
Mm-hmm.
being able to essentially front the cash to have the entire market cornered on an entire form of media, right?
Yeah.
Like the idea that there is a certain form of storytelling in YouTube, right? They have the full control over, and people have some issue in terms of like an entire community, having their work owned on that platform. Maybe you
Mm-hmm.
can talk about that as an issue, right? But the individual artists who are making stuff within there, that feels more like a circumstance thing to me. That feels more
Sure.
like you grow up and maybe you live in like, fucking Curry Parker. Sorry if I'm swearing. I don't know if this is going to be an unrated.
Yeah, we're in the back
Yeah,
rooms. All right.
exactly. Cur- Curry Barker lived in Alabama, right? Like he may have some cash behind him. I'm not sure what the major story is, but the idea that like, people can just kind of pop up, I think that that's also for the better. And the final note on that whole YouTube thing, it's like sometimes people hear about people who have completely separate professions who finally get into filmmaking, right? You would never disparage that person. You would be like, thank God they
No.
finally chased their dream, right?
Yeah.
You just hear that somebody wanted to tell a story and then they were able to do that, right? The only reason that somebody has any kind of apprehension to the idea of a YouTube filmmaker is because they think about somebody like Logan Paul who tried to make movies like after YouTube over and over again to become a film star, and it never worked. And people like Shane
Mm-hmm.
Dawson did the same thing, right? And those people you can very easily point to and be like, well, that's a hack. That's clearly someone who doesn't care about making a movie. But
Right.
like you were saying, right? Remove all that context, and you've got just like a young guy who decided to make something for fun, and it blew up because of the popularity of the series already, right?
Yeah.
And so much so to the point where there are two diverging like lores, right? There's like the internet community version, and then there's his, and his is probably more popular now. Like we're about to watch
Mm.
that become Star Wars fan fiction, if you know what I mean, like Star Wars extended
Sure.
universe
Yeah.
stuff. That's all I wanted to say about that.
Yeah. Yeah. To which I would reply, well, Elvis Presley made movies, uh,
Exactly.
so yeah, that dude was an artistic hack. But we look back and we say, an Elvis Beach movie. Okay. We're not mad. Like we're because we're not in it and we can't understand. But think about film at that time. And now Elvis comes onto the scene and he's like, well, I'm going to be a movie star too. It's the same thing as Logan Paul or Jake Paul or any of the people that you don't like. Look, relax. People that you don't like have been making movies forever. It's stupid and it's vain. I just think it's a little elitist to try to bar people at any door, and I'm just never gonna get. I'm never gonna get behind that. I'm never gonna get behind anyone saying no, you can't make a movie. I think that's not. Everyone
Mhm.
is free to make the film, and then we're free to talk about it or not watch it. So sure, Logan Paul, make however many movies you want. We're not going to watch them. Clearly, it didn't work,
Mhm.
and so I think the free market of of movie making works. We people will rally around a film or not, and I just think that we shouldn't punish people for where they start, and we also should be a little more excited about the decentralization of movie making, especially in America. We'll start talking about Backrooms now, and I'll just come out right away and say I didn't really like this movie,
Fair. Yeah.
But I don't care if a kid started making videos when he was younger and then made his first feature film at 19 or 20. Hey, that's cool. Great. I like that as a blanket statement. I like that as a possibility because that hasn't been a possibility for decades and decades. And so if things are becoming more open than just, 5 studio heads deciding who lives and who dies and what art gets made, please, no, so much worse.
I like that people are like, well, we should not encourage this YouTube thing and instead talk about the much more fair and evenly handled process, which is going to film festivals. Like,
Sure, right.
and another thing too, right, is I don't understand why this conversation always starts from the perspective of the individual, never from the perspective of the system. It's always from this perspective of why did this person do this thing, not to this way that I think that they should have done based on the way that they are expressing their worldview, right? Rather than this person expresses this worldview. This is the world they exist within. This is what they did to try to pull off that vision. How true is that vision to that worldview given those circumstances, right? Simple framing, right? Good faith, bad faith, right? And people just take the other side because it's easier, right? When it comes to the whole Kane Parsons thing, liking the movie or not liking the movie, for me personally, I don't think this is some masterpiece or anything, but this is extremely like what I like from movies. I like eerie, atmospheric things that just kind of make your skin crawl. I could live in a space if it's done well, and I think that this one, does that right. I'm not going full Chigiatel, like I'm not going to go to that degree. But like every time, we go found footage, I'm loving it. But what I will say is that Kane Parsons has a very specific worldview. He knows exactly what he's doing. And even if this film doesn't cover a lot of what happens in his, short films, a lot of the decisions in this film are informed by them still. So it clearly shows that this guy has a large degree of internal logic and a clear vision of how to execute that. And I would much rather someone like that make movies than a Logan Paul, right? And I don't see why people are getting so preemptively angry just because of the title, right? I've said this a couple of times now. It's like people get so upset about the sign in front of the door, right? But they don't look at the resume. They don't look at the work.
Yeah.
They just kind of, see the thing and they get artificially upset because of, how it looks rather than taking a look at what they had done before and weighing whether or not this is something that's actually worth giving a damn about. And what I will say before we even get into the movie, because I feel like we're about to transition to that, I think that Kane Parsons' web series, The Oldest View, is better than this film. And Seth, if you are interested in any of this stuff and you are open to watching a YouTube thing, that's an hour and 20 minutes. You can find it on YouTube in a playlist. Worth watching. Very easy recommend.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I mean, clearly this is a kid with ideas. He's got ideas. He's executing them, and so I'm sorry, but I'm more interested in a ship that's in motion than the people standing by, saying what the ship should be doing, like who've never driven a ship before. And so, like, forgive me, but I got into this to watch movies, not to listen to people talk about movies without actually watching them. So,
yeah.
And so even though I was going to skip this, only I say I was going to skip it. I skip how many movies, you know what I mean? Like, I wasn't like, I'm never going to watch Backrooms. I was just like, I don't know what that is. And there's other stuff out that I would rather see. So yeah, like I'm not like opposed to Backrooms. Now, having seen it, I am kind of opposed to Backrooms.
Just fundamentally, you're like ideologically.
Well, I mean, look, I was shaking my head the whole time so that everyone in the theater knew I did not approve of what the Backrooms were doing. Okay,
not cool. Don't like them.
You mentioned found footage, and when the film starts, I was like, "Oh, is this whole thing like a found footage?" And if I had to name the genre that I like the least in the world. It is found footage, but it's for one reason that this movie, for the most part, avoids, and I was very grateful for. Found footage movies are about 70% arguing.
Yep.
Because so you're locked into one of your characters, at least one of your characters has to be filming. Okay. So now we know that we're not with a script. We know that we're not with actors. We know that we're with normal people. And when normal people are put into stressful situations, they start to freak out, which leads to just, where are we going? What are we doing? I don't want to go in there. Blah, 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 blah. And it's just Blair Witch, going all the way back to Blair Witch, 70% arguing. So I wasn't looking forward to that, but we only have a little bit of that in this. I'm thinking mostly of like the lawn hallway downward with the rope and the this and the that. So I was grateful that we mostly avoid that, because a lot of it is just, one person at a time. But yeah, I was kind of bored. I'll be honest with you. I almost was falling asleep a few times during this, which for me never happens. I saw this at 5 p.m. on a Friday. Like, it wasn't even late. So that was shocking to me. I was like, I can't believe I'm so bored of falling asleep.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but I also, the movie starts and we're video camera going around, and I loved it. Every corner that they turned around felt like the film was, enacting violence upon me. The speed at which we're turning and panning, looking down a hallway, looking the other way, looking back and expecting something to be there. It all felt very aggressively scary. And I was like, if this is the whole movie, I'm going to be like in tatters by the time this ends. Like, I don't know what part of you is the opposite of fear or holds back the fear, but that thing will be exhausted by the end of this.
Gone.
And that wasn't the whole movie, but I honestly was like, I could watch this for an hour and a half. Like, if it's literally just like looking around corners, being scared. I think that one of the best things in a horror movie is when the people are scared. It's scarier to watch someone be scared than to watch something scary, if that makes sense.
Totally.
And so I really dug it. Then we get into all the other stuff, and I was like, I'm trying so hard. We're in that therapy scene and they're role playing, and I'm like, this is like so close to being really good, but I feel like the writing isn't fully there to bring me over this hump. And that's how I felt. Like, so much of it, I was like, this is so close to being really good, and it kind of just stays at, it's like this needs like just a little punching up, and then it would be great. But that's kind of how I feel. How did you feel about the movie?
What you just described right there, right? That's a central flaw with the film, right? Because Kane Parsons didn't write this movie. It was some other guy. It was some guy who wrote like one episode of Westworld, right? Like, he doesn't have a crazy career, right? The big issue is that Kane Parsons is, back like series, he wrote that, right? Like, he came up with that whole thing. And if he were to make his own film, I'm sure it would have just been a lot more focused on the research element, and I think probably would have been a bit more interesting. What I do like about the script that brings in here, and also just ties into my general thoughts on the film, it's very clean in the sense that like a therapist and a troubled patient and that troubled patient being, an architect who also wanted to, who now sells furniture, right? Being in this scenario, walking into an alternate dimension of this particular kind, all of that stuff is very tidy, both in terms of thematics and how it's executed. The major issues come from how obvious the dialogue can be at points. And it's not like you don't have great actors, right? Like those
Right,
actors are
right.
phenomenal, but some of that dialogue, you're just like, that is so thuddingly obvious. Like there's a moment where Ejiofor is going like, no rhyme, or there's a moment where he goes like, don't worry, there's nothing to worry about. I'm right behind you. Right? Like
Yeah.
stuff like that, right? Where you're like, I know what's about to happen, or I know what you're alluding to, right? So all of that stuff is pretty obvious. I think that there are certain moments that the film gets away with visually that are quite unique, and in terms of a storytelling beyond the creepiness factor. To round out my thoughts, the last thing I'll say, just to kind of go back to the first thing you're talking about, the found footage element, and something that's so exciting about the original series is that all of it was made in Blender for the most part. This idea that it was made virtually rather than he went to these spaces and did some
Right.
trickery. And what's interesting is that by doing it in Blender, not only did he create those spaces, light them that way, and actually I only found this recently, to get the VHS effect, he would literally convert the videos to VHS, then put that tape that's converted to VHS back onto digital and upload that.
Wow, that's awesome.
But yeah, he has that kind of dedication. And one of the things that he would do with the videos is because they're found footage, right? He has to control the amount of shake there is, right? And he controls what is being shown. And more importantly, you were talking about these found footage movies, how, there's a lot of arguing and bickering. Every Backrooms video is like a solitary experience. It's one person who's there and they're talking to themselves. Maybe they went there with somebody else, but they've been separated from their group. And that does wonders in terms of just like leaving you as the viewer to just kind of get absorbed into the space. And because Kane Parsons is aware of those tropes of, the bad camera angles and stuff, he's focusing more on being like, if I were in that scenario, what would I be looking at? And digitally, he can make it just do that because, matters more to the storytelling.
Yeah, that's great. Wow. I didn't
That's
know
just
that.
separate from, general thoughts. But I do think that this movie has some glaring issues. And I'm more surprised you fell asleep because there are some interesting things going on under the hood.
Yeah, I am not in the camp of, there's nothing happening in the movie or it's hard to understand. I don't think so at all. I actually was a little disappointed at the amount of information that is revealed.
Sure.
And the amount of explanation. I was like, oh no, I don't want this explained. I don't actually want to know. Like I just kind of want to be spooked, one of my favorite horror films of recent years, Skinamarink.
Classic.
That's what I'm looking for in a movie. I want to be scared. I want to be forced to look at something that I want to run from and don't want to look. I want to have to go down a hallway that I don't want to go down. And I don't want too much explained. It's scary just because it is. And here, once we got to Mark Duplass, I was like, oh no. Oh no, they're gonna tell us everything. Oh man, I don't want that. So yeah, I'm not in that boat of like this is necessarily like there's nothing going on. Look, I love movies where there's nothing going on. I think a movie where nothing's going on is a fantastic way to spend your time. But that's not this. I just found it boring. Like I just wasn't that interested in walking through a wall. The movie did pick up for me, I should say.
Sure.
Right before dumping me into, eating the stomach of a guy.
I was loving that. I was loving that.
The best thing is you can eat them. I was like, that is a cool idea, and it's creepy.
Mm-hmm.
So I get it, but like it just wasn't. It was just on this side of like a really disturbing, freaky thing to being like, I'm not involved anymore.
Yeah.
So, Chiwetel Ejiofor as Clark. How did you feel about the pirate architect alcoholic who I think is a little angry inside?
You think so? Yeah, he's got a
Yeah.
little temper. Yeah. Yeah. No. I found him to be the best. He's the anchor. If we're going to talk about pirates, right? I think that
Mm-hmm.
he understands exactly how corny and cheesy to play it, but he is playing most of it straight and serious, and like he's going for another Oscar, which I love. If we're talking about just from a superficial standpoint, I just love the whole joke that he's Captain Clark, Ottoman Empire, right? The
Mm-hmm.
idea that he's mixed Turkish culture into like
Mm-hmm.
piracy. I don't know. I just think that's really funny, and I like that they call that out. But when it comes to himself as a character, talking to the cleanness of the script, right? Like you're thinking to yourself as a screenwriter who's only made Westworld episodes, going like, I've got the backroom screenplay in my lap now,
Right.
right? Tap it away. You're going like, of course you're going to have an architect in the film, right? I
Right.
think that
Yep.
how you're going to speak to that is different. And I think this film is so preoccupied with nostalgia, obviously, right? And we're coming out of this nostalgia obsessed, spell for the past 15 years. And a lot of this film is about how nostalgia and obsession with the past is moral and mental decay. So we see that through Ejiofor's character specifically. And to round out my thoughts, I think that we'll talk about the dinner scene later, I feel, as we get more into the plot specifics. But
Yeah.
when we see him early on trying to do that commercial, right? And he's got that makeshift peg leg and he's like in pain and he's got the crutch and it's all in one take and he's out of breath. I wasn't loving every bit of dialogue he was saying with Renessa when we get to her. I obviously wasn't on his side when it came to like knowing kind of the background with him and his ex, but when it came to him going through that whole thing, you can tell that he thinks that he's a victim, right? And that
Oh,
he's letting
yeah.
that weigh it on him. And Ejiofor is playing that so well, so well, to the point where it became like a, the Shining Jack scenario. He's
Yeah.
not somebody who turns bad. He was always bad, and you're just seeing him get worse. And there's
Yeah.
something about that I appreciate.
Yes. And one of the great unifying ideas that The Shining and Backrooms both fall under is the labyrinth and the Minotaur, and the idea of the Minotaur being yourself, right? You fall in love with the maze so much, you move in, basically, where was it Theseus who kills the Minotaur? I can't remember. I can't
Some
fully
guy.
remember. I think it's Theseus who ends up killing the Minotaur, but for Jack, he takes on the role of the caretaker, and he's like, actually, I think we're never going to leave, and at least you're never going to leave because, and I've always been here. And
Why
with
would you want
Clark,
to leave?
right, he goes from the explorer to the resident, and I do think that the movie goes really far out of its way for him to really like speak to the audience almost like look at the camera and be like, now folks, this is why it's important to heal from things and move on instead of living in them and sitting with them, which I think is an idea that we just saw also in Obsession, the idea of like what happens when you're stuck in one zone because of inaction or because of having courage and taking this step, and then if things don't work out, you move on. Where Mary wants to keep taking him back to this moment so that they can play through it differently in an attempt to move past it. And he says, right to her, no, I'm embarrassed doing that. Like, I don't really like it. He does like it. And he
Well, he
later on
loves
is the
it.
one who's facilitating it. Right. But he wants to live in that moment, not move past it. And so, yes, yeah, it's definitely, I don't think you or I are trying to compare Backrooms to The Shining. in
No.
terms of quality or style, but you know, thematically, yes, there's a lot of overlap. I didn't love, like you said, we've got good actors. I think we've got great actors,
Some would
and
say some of the best in the industry.
yeah, and what a great actor can do is work with so-so dialogue. But I think that great actors also reveal so-so dialogue, where it's like, look,
True.
folks, we know what these people can do. I'm sorry, but so when it's not quite there, I have to go and blame it on the writing, you know. Yes, and I also liked that scene, you know, to see Ejiofor sweaty and kind of like filmed at, I'd say maybe unflattering angles. The whole thing is amateurish and embarrassing. I dug that. Because we don't often get to see people filmed in like really unflattering ways. And yeah, it didn't make me like Clark more,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I think that they do a good job, you know, in that scene. He breaks the chair and then he's like, you guys clean this up, and like walks away, where if they really wanted us to fully be endeared to him, you know, he would have sat in his wrecked throne, the wrecked throne of his life, and start to cry, and it would be a moment of sympathy. And instead, it's just more anger and more anger. And so, I don't know that he's a villain. I think it might be more complicated than that.
He's not the villain, but what he manifests as the villain is what I'll
Sure.
say, right? And I think
Yes.
that is interesting, right? Not to cut you off. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, just I think it's good that he is our, like you said, anchor, but he's not necessarily the person that we're trusting throughout the film. Yeah.
No. And I think one of the strengths of the film is that I don't think that we're introduced to anybody who's right. Because with Mary's character, she has Clark doing this, repeated exercise over and over again, because that's what she does every time she dreams, right?
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
very obviously, this stuff is all tied into the Backrooms itself, right? And like they have the conversations about how it's like copying and repeating over and over again. Like, I'm not sure how much like your son filled you in with the series on like online, but that goes far deeper in that stuff. But when it comes to Mary specifically, this whole film is her realizing that her methods were a mistake, right?
Right.
That she essentially was like putting this guy deeper and deeper into the spell. It wasn't her fault. I'm not blaming her. He's the guy who was, he's the captain of his ship, right?
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have to change if he doesn't want to, as he says. Another thuddingly obvious line that rattles around your brain. But
yeah.
The last thing on that whole Clark thing in my mind is like, like as you said, we don't like him, right? But we're in this thing where we want to see how it unravels in a tragedy sense, right? We want to see how ironic this is going to turn out for him. And also when we see his living situation, right? The fact that he's living within the store and watching TV on the showroom, right? We don't feel sad for him in that moment. It's a comedic bit, right? It's a moment where like, yeah, haha, laughing at him. And I think that delineation, everybody in the audience kind of knows that. So therefore we know we're not on his side, even earlier than that, but still from there. But the main thing I wanted to say there was that Mary, while she is a professional person, she's a person with a good head on her shoulders. I do think that she's too obsessed in the past. And I do think that she she falls victim to that just the same way that many people within society do,
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she is also using therapy on people, I think, and this is probably subconscious, to experiment and work through what she is still working through herself, which is no good.
We get that
you-
we get that shot of her sitting on her couch looking at that advertisement, right? And she looks like she isn't even convinced, right? It's the situation where she sees herself as corny and hollow, yet she's still going to keep on doing the same things. And then on the flip side, Clark loves it so much he's got the tapes in his car.
Right. Yeah, she looks embarrassed. She looks kind of unsure. Nothing is nothing in her, like the interior life that we see with her, seems to be excited or free. And I think that she realizes, like, yeah, when you go into an experiment to bear something out, you might be able to do that, but you're always going to be skewed to one side. You know what I mean? Because you set out in order to prove something. And so Mary is trying to, he might be an architect, but she is someone who has lived in a building. And that's two different sides, two different relationships to a room. Okay. There's the person who creates the room, which I think, when Clark first walks through the wall, the back rooms, I don't know if they go on forever. I don't know how you get from one place to another, but they do appear to be closer to his mind, full of furniture and all that stuff. And then as we move further out, other elements are introduced. So he might be the architect of these back rooms, but she is the one who has been forced to stay inside and not be able to open a window. And the movie shows her talking about opening a window and then shows us her trying to peer through a window. Right. And so we get the two versions we get the two perspectives on a room, the builder and the occupant. She is trying to get out. He is trying to go further in, and somewhere they'll meet in the middle, and then their paths will, diverge. And I think it's so, yeah, the movie's saying things. We're not saying that it's not saying things. Yeah, there's stuff going on. But
just to kind of build off of what you were saying right there while you collect your thoughts, right? I found that this whole idea of them going here or there, right? It's all in service of a bigger narrative, right? Which is that they're all moving towards a commercialized space, right? These are, people within their ordinary lives who are consolidating their personal life, right? Or, their casual life all into business. Ejiofor no longer lives at home. He lives within his work, right?
Right.
Renee is like living at home and her work is still, in her face and she's still thinking about her own trauma, right? You brought up like how the Backrooms works. I'm not going to get into some, quantum physics thing or whatever, but I will say that the whole Backrooms is an alternate dimension that was opened up by scientists accidentally in the 80s. It had already existed, but what they did in the 80s made it worse. And there's these breaches that are, becoming more and more common around America is the long and short of it. But the construction of the Backrooms is that it's trying to replicate the outside world and it's constantly expanding. And as time goes along, it gets better and better at copying itself. And in terms of the timeline of the Backrooms, series, we're like right at the end of it, right? So it's like in the movie, right? Like this is about as far as it goes in terms of like understanding of things in an actual sense, but some of the found footage things take place later. What I'm getting at here is that, that's pretty much it.
I liked Mary a little more than I liked Clark, but I got to tell you, like I didn't, not like I didn't care about them. I just wasn't like, oh yeah, I'm really super invested. I do feel like they're both really stunted into like they are what their arc is meant to be and really nothing beyond that. Mary going and picking up, the piece of driveway where, her childhood is it's good. It's good in like the Christopher Nolan, here is this character in an item or in a moment type of symbolism. Her childhood is literally in stone, set in stone, right? Her handprint to that location. And that's a lot of adults that we encounter, unfortunately. They are locked into that moment in their childhood or that time period that they still can't get past. And it's kind of like, I get that. And then I don't need for that character to literally carry that around with them. Like
It's
when
so on the
she wakes
nose.
up and it's on the bedside table. I was like, so you're just carrying it from room to room. Like at this point, you're telling me that this therapist can't let her childhood go, literally to the point where she goes to the furniture store at the end and she brings it with her.
Yeah,
And that is the
that's in her
part
pocket.
when she pulls that stone out of her pocket to beat the pirate minotaur of Clark's in her mind.
Awesome.
With her childhood tragedy, I was like, you can't do that.
Oh.
I'm sorry. Too much.
It was corny in the right way in my mind. Like all of that stuff you're saying, I'm not disagreeing with you. I appreciated that in the sense that so when it comes to the setup, right? I am with you there entirely, right? I think it's like way too obvious. When we first see it, that shot of her hand going in and her mother's beside her, and then you see like the crane drop that shrapnel on them. I think that's very effective. I think that's great.
That shot was super cool. But
yeah,
that's all
right?
we could have.
That's all we need.
Because we
right?
kind of get it, and then also, someone else is going to put their hand through material in this movie, so we have to also show that,
well, actually, it's very interesting because like her own thought process is directly tied to the construction of the Backrooms, right? Like as we see later on, she has that vision, and then as we keep on sinking, right, we get that kind of direct parallel, right? So I think what you're saying, like in terms of her life experience being exactly like the Backrooms, that you're on the money. But I do also like the fact that we get that like smash cut. We see the hammer go in. We think that that's that, right? We think, oh, okay, that scene's done. But then when it's shown on the bedside table, I'm like, oh, come on. The one thing that I'm like, give it leeway, right, is we don't know which hand she picked up, right? Did she pick up her own hand? Did she pick up her mother's hand? And I think that's an interesting question. But beyond that, like, I think that it's pretty obvious as well. And I'm like, I'm not a big fan. The fact that it's revealed that she has it in her pocket and she uses it to beat the final villain in the head, I think that that's so stupid, but I'm with it because this is a dumb horror movie at the end of the day. And I was like, okay, that makes sense for closing her arc out. Is this the most, sophisticated thing? I recognize it's not, but it's clean enough to where it works. Kane Parsons is working with what he's got with the script is what I get there.
Yeah. And, to be clear, I think that like where a lot of these ideas start is good. It's just when you feel that everything needs to resolve in our faces, at this point you've left subtlety behind, and you're not trusting us to put two and two together. You don't want us to realize on our way home, oh, that's what that meant. Or like in talking with someone, you want us to realize it there. You want us to see it and tie everything up with a nice bow and say, this is what this is. And that's fine, because sometimes you hear someone tell a story and it's great, and then you have questions after. And sometimes you hear someone tell a story and it's a great story, but man, they took a really long time in getting there, and you're ready for it to be done. And it's like, just give us the punches. Give us the punches, not all of the explanations and the motivations and the pictures and the symbolism. The movie can stand on its own, and it's especially a movie like this. This is high concept. This is abstract. A chair is halfway through a floor. You can do whatever you want. You can end this however you don't need to explain a thing. Now, I'm going to use a word. Listeners, you got to trust me, okay? I'm not using this lightly. And I'm also not making a comparison in quality or cultural impact, okay?
I love where this is going.
But you can't do David Lynch and then explain yourself. You can't do The Room with the little person in a wheelchair who puts on a red lampshaded lamp, which, folks, if you know anything about the history of Mulholland Drive, right? Lynch literally,
just a little Easter egg for those eagle-eyed viewers,
right? Lynch literally advises us to pay attention to the red lampshaded lamp, right? You can't do that and then explain yourself. Spielberg it. You can't mix the two. I'm sorry. Like, and look, we're here. We're here to see your movie. We're here for Backrooms. We know it's going to be weird. We know it's going to be abstract. We know it's going to be scary. Trust in that. Just trust in that. And that's why that whole dinner scene to me was like, nope. Like, if you want me to feel, huh?
You didn't like it at all. Wow.
I liked parts of it. But I think that it's mixing the abstract with the fully explained, and that's not fun. Like, that's not fun at all. You know, I'm sorry, but when I go to museums, very rarely am I reading the little placards to explain to me what the art means, because I don't want to know. I want to sit here and enjoy the piece without having it explained to me. That might make me ignorant in one way, but in another way, I'm free. I'm unlimited. I can look at whatever piece of art and experience it as it is, not as it's explained. And so, yeah, let's talk about that dinner scene.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell me what's happening?
I want to talk a bit about like that whole exposition thing, right? Because I agree with you, right? I think that is a major problem in this film, and I think that in the web series it actually uses exposition in a really interesting way, because there's like even full episodes where it's just like, we're going to give you a detailed description of a lamp, right? And that's going to be 15 minutes long. And the whole episode is just like its molecular composition, where they found it, all the relation to it, right? And what's interesting are the things that are tangentially related to it, right? Or the way it fleshes out the world, right? That's good storytelling in the sense that the exposition presents itself as directed one way, but it's indirect in other ways. This film is so thuddingly obvious, and I agree with you that when it's, hitting you in the face with those themes, it's just too much, right? That being said, I think representationally in the baseline ideas, if you were to take out the dialogue, right, maybe make this black and white and turn this into a German expressionist film, I think this would be incredible, right? Like,
absolutely.
You could literally just like take that same scene, like take out the dialogue, throw in the title cards, and everyone would love it, right? And the real beast there is just that it's so in your face about it, right? For me, I'm watching that sequence and I'm getting caught up in the emotion of it. That's what matters more for me than like if the dialogue is 100%, if the visuals are not 100%. It's a medley, right? For me, if I can feel the mixture coming together, then that's what matters most for me, right? So with that,
someone might call it a cosmic gumbo.
That's some might say that. Some might say that I've been asked to describe a dog, and they think that they've caught me, and then I'm like, idiot, I know what a wolf looks like, and I just draw that.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna let you finish, but
no, I'm done. You go ahead.
I just have to say, I heard a really good thing from Osgood Perkins, everyone's favorite director.
Very uncomplicated filmmaker. Take that however you will.
But he had a great quote, and I've really taken it to heart, because it kind of explained that idea that I said to you earlier about us leaving as much baggage as possible when experiencing a new film. Mm-hmm. He said, either he said about movies or about movie watchers, that there are beaters and there are eaters, and there are movies that you try to beat as you're watching them. I'm going to figure this out, right? I'm going to be able to explain it. Or there are movies that you just eat and you just sit there and you're like, the language that we usually use is, oh, it just washed over me. Or like, oh, I was just so immersed, right? And there are movies where you're not trying to take control of the dream, right? I don't know if you have ever done lucid dreaming or trained yourself to lucid dream. Yeah. And so there are dreams that I am able to recognize that I'm in a dream without waking myself up. And then I experience the dream different. At least I have fooled myself into believing that, right? Because I could be dreaming that I'm realizing it's a dream. But then there are dreams where I'm not in the driver's seat whatsoever. And I'm just experiencing things, and I'm going to a baseball game with Scott Baio for some reason.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Saturday night. It's a good night.
And I wake up and I think, wow, what a strange dream. But I didn't have control of it. And so, yeah, beaters and eaters is something that I've really taken to heart. And I say all that to say I wasn't trying to beat this movie. I really wasn't. But when that line is delivered,
the dog one,
it's like trying to describe a dog to someone who has never seen one and then asking them to draw it. I will say, first, I thought, ooh, that's good. And I thought about it for half a second and thought, well, okay, so this person has never seen a dog, but they've seen a cat. So just tell them to draw a cat and make the nose longer. Or they've seen an elephant or a wolf, we could even say that. You could say, draw a man on his hands and knees with a fuzzy arm coming out his butt. There are ways to give that example and it be an example that just falls apart the moment you examine it. I thought was very, very funny because I thought, you know what? That's actually the perfect example for this movie to give. It's trying to appear like it's unapproachable and ununderstandable. But then if you think about it for 2 seconds, it's actually very understandable. And I guess I'll use that to transition into, look, I mean, hey, everyone's actual favorite filmmaker and person that we love, Mark Duplass,
Finally getting to him. I was itching the entire time to get to it.
Yeah, he's credited as Phil. Okay. Mm-hmm. He loves The Never-Ending Story. I should say 2 films referenced overtly and just actually referenced. Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, which I thought was fun. And Never-Ending Story, which I love The Never-Ending Story. And I liked that idea of this being a never-ending story, and also less so in the film, but in the book Never-Ending Story, Bastian becoming this godlike entity in Fantasia, where anything he makes or thinks of basically can exist. And so that translates to the Backrooms, except, it appears that we are less in control of what's being created, but it was a good pull to compare the 2 stories, I would say. How did you feel about Dr. Phil?
You have to admit to yourself that you've got a drinking problem. But when it comes to Phil, actually, we kind of have to come at this a different way, I'd say, right? Because Phil is the representation of async, right? And I feel that this is when we start to get into this separate version of the Backrooms, and this is what the series was predominantly versus what it is in the movie. And I feel like as it is in the movie, they've stripped it so much that it feels very vacant and just merely representational. And I felt that was kind of a shame, considering that the backstory was so much more interesting. And you've been saying this a few times now, this idea of like baggage coming into the film, leaving it out at the door, right? I do this with every film I watch as well, in every respect. In that comes also in the form of like understanding the source material and going like, if I don't know what that is that as effective, right? And in this sequence, right, in the original series, like the main storyline is about how somebody is a part of that group, gets separated from them, like falls down a pit, and then reappears months later, right? And the company was like, "Oh, we thought you died, so we faked your death, and now you've returned." So they've got like a paperwork. They're like, "This is going to ruin our whole plans with doing all of this," right? So they keep him in a medical facility away from society for 3 weeks. He goes crazy. He breaks out, goes back into the back rooms, right? 3 days later, he escapes the back rooms and then kills some people on the way out. And then they say he fell and hit his head on a rock and died, right? The whole story of the async story, like thing that I just told you there, is the story of its disillusion. The idea that after that happens, they lose funding. That storyline happens right before this movie happens. So we're watching like as the company's being defunded, right?
Got it. Okay.
And what's also interesting too is Phil is watching the Neverending Story, and we see Clark is watching Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, right? The idea is that they are both linked as villains, right? They're both linked as people who are in Arrested Development, and Phil is saying the same things at the end that Clark was saying, right? Obviously with the dog and how he's so obsessed with this fake world that he's no longer participating in the real one as much. I think that all of that stuff is there, but for whatever reason they were like, we need to remove a lot of this async stuff. And I'm like, I can feel the film wanting to do more. We keep cutting back to Phil, but it's like Phil doesn't really have much to do in the storyline, and given what the original thing could have been, that may have worked better. But as it is in the film, it's like merely representational, and I feel like it may not be enough for somebody to fully grab onto, you know?
Right. Oh, definitely. I mean, I'm evidence that it isn't.
Yeah.
And so I think, I don't know. I mean, I will say that I don't know what their intention was, whether it was to grab fans or non-fans. And if this was for fans, God bless them, I don't need to be part of the conversation. If this was for non-fans, I think that there may have been a misstep or two. And I think that you either need to make it completely its own thing. Also, and folks, forgive me for what I'm about to say, but you don't need this movie to be as long as it does if you just avoid some of those elements and plot lines, especially to just kind of end up saying what we kind of already knew intuitively about, it's like the place remembers, but it remembers different each time, which is something that I've heard about human memory, that when we remember something, we're not remembering the actual event, we're remembering the last time that we remembered it. And that's why visiting something that you haven't seen since you were a child is such a revelation to us as adults. You realize how big something was. You realize how small something was, because your memory of it is just so inaccurate. Imagine if you drove in your friend's car 2 weeks ago. And then the next time you go to get into that car, as you're lowering yourself into the passenger seat, you say, whoa, wait, hold on. I don't remember this car being so big last time. They would look at you like you're insane. It's like, what are you talking about? And yet every experience with a childhood location is that. And we recognize that you're not insane for misremembering things from that long ago, and yet we still rely on memory for everything. It's like we understand the limitations and the falsehoods of memory, and yet our entire existence is based on, I remember that if I sit on this chair, it won't break underneath me. I remember how to do my job. I remember to take my medicine. Like everything is based on it, and it's so faulty. And I think that's something that we can understand intuitively from the first half of the film without it being spelled out to us by Mark Duplass.
No.
And I think there's enough there that's universal. Like there are universal experiences. All right, I'm going to get a little gross here for a moment. I was peeing the other day, okay?
Whoa. You can do that?
And as I looked down into the toilet, it was like I connected to all of the past Seths that I've been in my life. And I realized, I was like, wait, this image, just this image, I've seen this image so many times throughout my life.
The bowl may have been different, but
it was like all of the toilets that I've seen lined up on top of each other. And I was like, this is so odd. I've never thought about just this mundane, literally POV of like looking down into a toilet. But I've done that thousands of times. And it was really like, it was a profound moment in my existence where I was like, oh my God, what are the other universal views? Right? And I thought about like, looking down at your feet as you're walking, or like your hand reaching for something, or how often has the image in my head been, my hands on the steering wheel, looking out the dashboard of a car as I drive. So I think that there are things that are universal and intuitive, and they don't need to be spelled out. And, I will invoke his name only one more time, but this is something that Lynch understood. Lynch understood that most people dream, and most people have the same unease and curiosity about our dreams. And so he replicates that feeling in his films so often, and it's so wonderful. And he also knows that dreams don't need to be explained. You don't. Yeah. At the end of, imagine how boring it would be if at the end of every dream, someone came into your dream and was like, okay, no, wait, hold up, before you wake up, this meant this meant this, and this meant this. Okay, bye. Instead, we wake up and we thought, well, why did I dream? Oh my God, why did I have a dream that I was doing my taxes with Rolo Tony? Like,
hey, I'm good with numbers. I'm a numbers guy. Hold on. I think that what you're speaking to there is interesting, because you're talking about this film as if it's predominantly dream logic, which is different from the way that like it's traditionally, represented, right? It's presented as like an alternate dimension or like a portal that's been created, right? But because of the way that this film is, dealing with the serene mysteriousness, and then also the fact that the screenwriter feels a little green, right? I feel like they wanted to make it so clean and tidy in terms of those connections thematically to where it has to feel that way, right? Where it is overly explaining because it feels like it's not reaching there. I agree with you. It's too obvious that because it draws that dream-like parallel. I think that if it felt more grounded, if it wasn't so heady in its approach, right? Because Kane Parsons would have been heady in his approach regardless, but from a screenwriting perspective, it thinks it's pulling the wool over your eyes. But it's like, no, we've been here. We know this. You're not reinventing the wheel in this department. What's interesting are these images, right? You talked about that dinner sequence, right? Like, I think that the way that those people are designed are really creepy, right? I think that that's really effective.
Absolutely. Yep.
And something that we didn't even touch on, right? The fact that there's this, mimic version of his ex-girlfriend / wife. I don't remember if it was Clark's girlfriend or wife. I think it was wife.
Yeah, wife,
yeah. But the fact that the film, the dialogue sometimes is too much with the allusions to abuse, but I think that Ejiofor plays it really well. And the way that it's depicted when she runs to the corner and we get that reveal of the giant Clark version, right? I think that all of that stuff is excellent just visually, right? And that's also separate from the exposition almost at a point, right? I'm just kind of getting to prices that I really appreciated and parts that actually make this work when it's able to just feel like an experience, when it's able to just be it, right? Rather than
Yes.
talk about how it is an experience, right? That's when it actually works. So just kind of like agreeing with largely the framework of what you're saying, but I'm able to get lost a bit more than it seems like you were able to be.
Yeah. And I should say too, like, I'm not the biggest fan of like, this is this genre, this is that genre.
Of course, yeah.
I'm a big fan of when we play with genre and when we mix things together. But I think that the movie presents itself, and again, this is me speaking as someone who has not seen the videos. And so again, I might not be the target, right? But going in blind, this presents itself as surreal and ends up being science fiction. And those two things are not the same. When your surrealism is explained by science fiction, well, it's not surreal anymore. It's science fiction.
Yeah.
There are reasons behind everything that's happening. We don't say, oh my God, it was so surreal in Star Wars when they made that thing float. No, that's not.
No, there's a reason.
Anymore.
Yeah.
It's science fiction. And weird things happen in science fiction, but it is explained with science.
well, actually, Seth, you're getting at something that's like perfect
and,
with the.
Well, wait, I just want to say, like, finishing
ahead.
up that, in case you're sitting there thinking, well, no, that's not the same thing. Star Wars is actually the best example of that in how that sucks, because the Force went from an unexplained phenomenon to midichlorians, where George Lucas himself was like, we're going to explain what's actually happening. And so even the surreal part of Star Wars is explained by science fiction. And that's why the two things cannot be at the same time. And so, yes, that's, I think, why I did feel a little less than enthused by the ending was, oh, this isn't dreamlike. This is MRI machines.
Yeah. That's the fascinating thing with the series, right? Is that it has no pretense of surreality in that sense. It is straight hard sci-fi, right? And I think that the reason that the film gives off that feeling and the reason they went that way was because of those divergent parts, right? Those found footage things that are separate from the science stories that I was saying. Those ones are often like random people who just wind up in the back rooms, right? And just by nature of the presentation of those videos, there is a surreal nature to, I've walked into a room and there's a million pools, right? That's kind of surreal, right? But within like just that concept, right? But the more that you start to learn about it, the more that you dig deeper into it, the more that it's all explained away, right? Going on to what you were saying before, right? If it's hard sci-fi, then it's no longer surreal, right? It's more so just like the mystery box kind of thing, right? The fact that we're presenting with like a polar bear on an island, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, I want to learn more about that. That's what Backrooms is, right? And I think that for whatever reason, at some point in the filmmaking process, they were like, we should lean heavy into the expressionism since, many of these rooms have no logical geometry. I love that little hill that Ejiofor has to walk up to open 3 doorknobs to get into a door. Like, I wish there was more of that stuff. There's a lot of it, but like, that's the thing that had people excited in my theater, right? Like there's a sequence when they walk into a room and it's only lit up by the Christmas tree, right? And the audience was like nervous. It's so
as
hell.
Good. It's
right?
so good. Yeah, absolutely. And then the choice
before I move on, just quickly, just like what makes that scene scary to people, right? It's just the like sad nostalgia for Christmas. And that, for whatever reason, is the thing that's making somebody scared in that moment. I just think that's fascinating. That's the only thing I wanted to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the choice of I can't think of the Feliz Navidad as the song that's playing. The way it's lit, the things around it, coming around to the back of the Christmas tree. Oftentimes, I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, but oftentimes the back of the Christmas tree is the the spot saved for the best present or the big present or the last present, right? And so that idea of like, peering around the backside and it being something really scary that potentially wants to hurt you. Yeah, I agree. Like I do think the movie is saying good things about like anti-nostalgia, even though it's very much like, hey, we're in 1990 using VCRs and camcorders and stuff. And I'm anti-nostalgia. Like I just can't get into this idea. I think it's okay to grow up,
Yeah.
Back to Star Wars, I think it's okay to let the past die and kill it if we have to.
Well, if we're talking about Star Wars, right? Like in this thing about having it die, right? That's in reference to The Last Jedi. And what happened when that movie came out? Everyone lost their minds and the studio decided to listen to them and then
Right.
catered the Star Wars franchise, right? And I think that all of that stuff about Star Wars, less interesting conversation to me. The more interesting conversation is that, for, the past 40 years or so, more than that, Star Wars has been this thing that's been constantly reinnovated to just be
Yeah.
sold to younger audiences with the
Yeah.
assumption that, they're just going to love it forever. You show your 5-year-old Star Wars, and then by the time they're 20, they're going to show, their future kids that, so on and so forth. But the reality is that some, stories are, rooted in culture. Very foreign concept, I know. The idea that these things age out, and some kinds of stories speak to other generations than others. And I think the reality is that a lot of these constant reboots and stuff, it's not just that they're bad, but it's also because like the people who grew up today feel nothing in common with the people who grew up and watched Star Wars, really.
Right.
Yeah. And to have those things constantly remade over and over again, it makes them feel nothing. And while those older people may be watching those movies, forcing them to keep being made, there's nothing that represents how they feel, detached from society, a world that was built for somebody else that just keeps existing for them as slowly decays, right? That they can visit, right? The idea is that Backrooms is kind of their own way of looking at existence that's been built for them, right? Exciting for somebody else, but has slowly faded within time and has now, become gross. And
Right.
I think that when it comes to that, comparison, or bringing up in relation to Star Wars, I think that something like Backrooms becoming popular just shows that there is this urge to explore something that feels in connection or in conversation with the younger generation. I think for a very long time, studios have been averse to doing that because they've been afraid of how to approach that. And I think that at least this film broaches that. I don't think it's 100% successful, but I think it gets there.
Yeah, absolutely. I have no problem with, the Beatles no longer being universally accepted as the best band of all time.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I have no problem with us growing up and moving past. This week on the main show, we just covered Citizen Kane, a clearly great film.
Parsons.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the Kane double feature, actually. But I did find myself wondering the whole time I watched it. I was like, could this film exist in a vacuum where someone today who's 18 to 20 could watch this, and would they put it in the same category that it's been put in by past generations, right? And even saying that, I think some people would find sacrilegious. And they'll say, well, what do you mean? It's Citizen Kane. But when you say Citizen Kane and when I say it, it could be two very different things. And I'm okay with things changing over time. I don't want there to be monoliths, and I don't want there to be institutions that are untouchable, because that's just not reality. That's, like a cultist mentality towards something that meant something to you, and now you feel you need to keep it alive. If it is worth staying alive, it will stay alive, and our relationship to it can change. And yeah, just to clarify too obviously for our listeners what you were saying, a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy eventually becomes a grotesque thing, which I think we're seeing right now with generative AI, where there is something about AI that is very, very off-putting to a lot of people. There is something that we can sense isn't real, and it's because it's a copy of a copy of a copy of something, where something that's new and fresh, please. So look, if Backrooms is making a ton of money and a bunch of young people are seeing it, a bunch of young people saw it in the theater that I was in. I would say the theater was 50% full, which for that specific theater that I go to is like the most people I've ever been in a theater with. Most of them were young. They all stayed in their seats afterwards and talked about it. And so if that is this generation's entry point into going to see a film and sit around and talking about it, I don't care. This isn't for me, and I'm glad that it exists, because something, as long as something does that, I don't care what it is.
I care in the sense that it, like, I hated Project X, right? Like when that came out, and that like came out, and that was a huge deal. I'm like, this is for the worst, right? This ruined every party, right? But something like this, it speaks to something sadder, right? And the fact that this is such a big hit, right? The concept of the Backrooms exploding as it has, right? The fact that so many people know what it is, and not only know what it is, but like actually like resonates with. The fact that it's going to make like $80 million this weekend, that says something, right? That's a really strange, somber declaration, I find. And when it comes to like going like, what does this mean? I think that there is some kind of like reckoning. This does have some kind of like larger, remorse or regret to it, rather than what a usual blockbuster is, was just like celebration or what have you. I think that's a very interesting thing to consider about this film and what it represents in terms of like how it does speak to the culture at large. But as it is, I appreciate, like, essentially, like I like going on that adventure. I like going through and being taken down that dark alleyway, seeing the thing down there, and being lost in that moment. And I think that the film, if if it had leaned into more of that, if it didn't take us out of there too much, then it would have been a bit better. I'm rambling a bit. Go ahead.
Well, I think that we better head out of the back rooms before we decide to stay here for too long. I guess my final thought is it's fine. It's not. I think that it's somewhat competently made. Obviously, visually, the actors, all of that stuff is fine. I think it could have taken another pass, and I think that it can trust us a little bit more. But ultimately, I'm just one person, and if a lot of people enjoy this movie, then I'm happy for them. And I also think it's fine to have young people make movies, and maybe that should happen more often. Maybe you could watch this and say this is the experience of some people who need a little bit more experience. Who cares? Look, I'm watching like the worst movies ever made, and they're not doing, they're not upending my life. And so this is very far from that. So it's fine. It's fine.
To round up my thoughts as well, because I can hear the rope being pulled from behind you, to escape the backrooms.
Yes. Rolo Tony and I are recording this early in the morning, and my family is beginning to rumble. So if you're hearing noises in the background, that's what's happening.
Mm-hmm. It's not an entity in the other room, coming to get us, in the back rooms. It's, reality. But yeah, no, when it comes to rounding up my thoughts, I just lost my train of thought. It's kind of like the Backrooms in that sense. So the biggest problems with this film comes from how traditional it is, right? The parts of the screenplay that felt like we've seen it a million times and was just too blatant, hitting it too on the nose. The next pass around, it needs to get darker, it needs to get weirder, it needs to be harder sci-fi, and I think Kane Parsons needs to have more control. I think that what this shows is that the elements that work best are when it's not, trying to be like everything else, but when it's its own thing. And the fact that when you watch this film and you don't have like traditional monsters like you get in a horror movie, the fact that people are just watching characters walking from room to room, and just the atmosphere of that, the architecture is enough to scare people. I think that that's an interesting film. I think that's different from what you see from most horror movies today. We brought up The Shining a lot, but I do also feel as though there's a strong connection to Tourist Trap in the sense that it's playing with surreality, right? Not 100% a surreal film, but it's one that's definitely playing. There's a universe, and the villain is playing a trick on the circumstances. Anyways, I think that of the like I just said before, Project X, is a good example of what I don't want the kids to be watching. And then this is a good example of what I'd rather the kids to be watching, because if they're watching just like dark, slightly impressionistic horror films that focus on ambience, I think that spells more interesting art in the future, in terms of where people's tastes could go. We've had such an overload of sugar and bubblegum in terms of like superheroes and reboots and remakes and stuff. The fact that like the younger crowd actively wants to slow things down does speak to some interesting futures ahead. So yeah, didn't mean to ramble so much on this episode, but kind of like the Backrooms, I felt like myself starting a point and then ending up at another point, on this episode. But I feel like that's just the nature of trying to get a grip on this film. So thank you for having me on again, Seth.
Yes, absolutely. Liam, where can people find you online?
Absolutely. You can find me at Poor Old Rolo Tony at Twitter. And then you can also listen to my thoughts on These Guys Got Juice. You can find that on Twitter, as well as you can find it on Spotify, Apple Music, all that stuff that you can listen to podcasts on. You can also find me on Unsourced Wall Radio, which we've been recently going through the Children of the Corn films. And if I can tie in one more thought on Backrooms there, the bad thing about Children of the Corn films or any kind of horror series, you get the idea of this thing, you're like, what can I make this about, right? Children of the Corn is always like you get that property and they choose the stupidest, weirdest decision. With Backrooms, it's like at least they got this concept and they made something that made sense, and all of the issues just come in how expected and disappointing it was. But anyways, that's where you can find me.
Please follow everywhere and listen. Liam is one of the only sane voices left in the
Put a lot of weight on my shoulders.
in the film discussion space. Hey, if you like this episode, we would love it if you give us a rating or review wherever you are listening. Unfortunately, folks, we live in a very algorithmically driven world. What does that mean? I don't know. It's just something that I say to rouse you to attention so that you'll say, I hate the algorithm. I'm going to leave Movie Friends a review or a comment or a share because I'm being a good soldier in the war against the algorithm. Isn't that manipulative of me? I probably shouldn't do that, right? But hey, if you are roused to action, I would really appreciate it. All right, give us a rating and a review wherever you're listening. You can also send us an email, moviefriendspodcast@gmail.com. Hey, please let us know what you thought about Backrooms. Were we totally off the mark? Did we nail it? Were we too nice? Were we not nice enough? Wait. No, yeah. Okay. Anyway, you tell us, all right? Tell us your opinions on Backrooms, Kane Parsons, YouTubers. I'll even take a Logan Paul email. Sure. Jake Paul, whatever,
If you want us to box, just let us know. We can get in the ring.
I would do a film Twitter boxing tournament.
Oh, that'd be so funny. That'd be so funny.
Yep. Find out no one can actually fight.
Oh no, I can do the razzle dazzle,
Sure,
1, 2,
yeah.
Look at my hand. You look at it this end, you look at it,
Right, yeah. Hey, you can also support the show, patreon.com/moviefriendspodcast. Listen, folks, you sign up, okay? It's $5 a month. You get access to all of our additional episodes and series. You get to vote on upcoming movies every month, and every quarter a monthly theme. Oh my gosh, you get to join our Patreon-only Discord. You get ad-free episodes. You get all that stuff.
It pays for itself.
That's right. Well, that's the crazy thing is you sign up and eventually you actually start making money,
That's why actually I didn't want to like say that on mic, Seth. That was just what I had heard, but you're confirming this. Yeah.
Well, it's because, you learn skills that will actually help you. Your boss one day is going to ask you like, hey, I need help with something. I'm trying to connect midichlorians and Star Wars to Kane Parsons, the Backrooms.
And before they even finish, you're going Movie Friends Patreon.
Like, and you're gonna be like, yeah, you're gonna be like, I've got just the thing. Boom, promotion. You're no longer living in your furniture warehouse. You're back on Easy Street. Okay, Patreon.com/Movie Friends Podcast. Anyway, Liam, thank you so much for joining me. This was a fun movie and fun discussion.
Agreed on all fronts. And it's been too long. Glad to be back in pod form with you again. And I'm excited to see how people experience this and relay that as the weeks go along. So thanks again for having me, and hopefully we'll be in touch soon.
Yes, absolutely. Hey, and thank you very much for listening. Until next time, have a good one.
Movie Friends is produced by Seth Vargas and Michelle Rubenstein. Theme music by Jean Marie Vargas. Visit us at our website, moviefriendspodcast.com, and please subscribe and rate our show wherever you are listening. You can support Movie Friends at patreon.com/moviefriendspodcast. Thanks for listening.